Welcome to Beyond the Data. I'm Dr. Phoebe Thorpe, here to talk about adolescent health. And with me today is Dr. Stephanie Zaza, the Director of the Division of Adolescent and School Health. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is a very exciting session of Public Health Grand Rounds about adolescents, teenagers. Everybody knows that teenagers and adolescents change, evolve. It can be day to day, it seems like forever, and then they get through it. What is it about that time period in people's lives that is so important for us to focus on from a public health point of view?
Well, I'm glad you asked. It's a really profound time of change. Lots going on for these young people, and there's natural risk-taking that has to happen for them to grow and mature. And that's why it's so important that we pay attention. This is the time when all kinds of new behaviors are being tried out, tested, if you will, and they're learning from those. And so if we can really encourage healthy habits and try to, as much as possible, reduce the risky habits that they could be forming, it does two things. First, it prevents problems right now when they're kids. So, for example, reducing risk behaviors right now. But that it also sets up new habits for a lifetime so that they'll have healthy nutrition, for example, throughout their whole life if they're learning how to do that now. It's a very important time because they're learning so much so fast.
And it's the habits now that they form that they carry through into adulthood and the rest of their life.
Exactly.
Sure. So can you tell me some about the risks that we're concerned about that adolescents take? Everybody knows the ones about like texting and thing, but what are some of the other ones?
Well, I think you raise a really important one. You know, 10 years ago, we didn't have to even ask the question, have you ever texted while you were driving? We ask that question now, and a very disturbing number of young people admit that they text while they're driving or use the phone. And so that's a really important new risk. We're also seeing some emerging things like the use of e-cigarettes or other vapor products, which we didn't really have as a risk before. So the things that are ongoing, though, I think injury risks are huge. So bicycle helmets, learning safe driving habits, for example, those are really important during this time. And then the other set of habits, there are several. Using substances, alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, very important. If young people don't start in this time of life, they often won't ever. So really trying to avoid some of these very risky behaviors in adolescence can be very important. And then the third area that I think I'd focus on is sexual risk. This is a normal time. This is puberty, sexual maturation. It's unique to adolescence. And again, this is how young people have to learn how to manage these new feelings and new bodies that they're inhabiting. And so helping them through that time to understand how to be safe with their sexual habits, how to hopefully delay sexual initiation until they're really ready, and then once they do, to be safe in their habits with a smaller number of partners, with using condoms, using contraception, really helping them learn what those things are for a lifetime.
Yeah, and that sounds really kind of like the interventions that you're talking about are both looking at risks that they're taking, but also addressing or looking at the good behaviors that they have, either we're wanting them to take or that they're already doing. And I have, through working this session with you, I have heard more about how the focus is also not only kind of don't do that, but also, hey, you're doing this well. Can you tell us some about that shift in the concept of adolescence?
Really, really important area. So we call them, we often talk about risk factors, but what we want to also focus on, and maybe want to focus on even more, are what we call protective factors, things that really help young people, things like youth development, parent engagement. There's almost nothing more important than the parent relationship with the young person, constant conversations and knowing that the parent is there. These are important. Connectedness to the school can be very important for young people, so that sense of belonging and having safe places within that school. So for kids who feel like they're maybe excluded from some things or bullied, to find allies and to find places where they know teachers and to know that the school supports them. So these kind of protective factors are really important for young people as well. Not just focusing on the, sort of the scolding, don't do that kind of,
but providing
that nurturing and that youth development, giving young people responsibility for their health and sort of setting that expectation, but giving them the tools to do it, the skills and the knowledge to do that.
That's a very good example of it, because when you were saying, I was thinking of, you had mentioned that as children go into adolescence, that one of the things as clinicians that we can do is try to encourage them to have alone time with the physician while they're there for their visits. That's an example of what a clinician or an individual could do. There's also more about what communities can do. And can you tell us a little bit about how the interventions run that whole gamut of individual or clinician to community, and where that's going?
So, we've talked a lot about young people and working with them individually. We also look at things like health education and physical education in school. So the schools can do lots of things. Clinicians have a very important role. So they provide a lot of anticipatory guidance. They're actually providing some of that health education, if you will, in that setting. They're also teaching, in the nature of that relationship, a young person how to be a good healthcare consumer, how to take care of, how to seek information and services when they need them. Very, very important. And it's important for parents to understand why that needs to happen, so that they will either absent themselves from the visit or allow that to happen, so that the young person can learn how to engage with their physician. And then in the community, I think it's very important that we think about the whole community is supporting adolescents, their families, making sure all those pieces are fitting together. So we think about, for example, the school can't do everything, but the school can have good connections to clinical services or other health services in the community and help the adolescent actually activate those services and get to those services. That's important. Having good transportation to those services. And then once the young person arrives there, that those services are teen friendly, that they understand how teenagers think and work and feel and what they need, so that when the teenager gets to that place, they feel comfortable and confident and able to use that service.
Yeah. So, and we talk about a lot of different interventions in the session. And they're like here and there, and they're great examples. But I would really like to know, what's the next step? How can we go from here and there to beyond, to what can we do to make it bigger? And also, like, the whole child, it sounds like it's like everywhere we need to kind of work.
I think the most important thing we need to do first is to set adolescence, the stage of adolescence, as a priority. So we do a really good job with early childhood, for example, lots of energy, lots of attention to early childhood development, early childhood education, vaccines in childhood. And then we sort of expect our adolescents to kind of go it on their own.
They're almost there.
They're almost there, almost adults, but they're not mini adults. They are in a very unique developmental stage. And so first, I think, as communities, we have to prioritize acting during this time to help nurture that development, that very specific developmental stage. I think that's the first thing we have to do, because you can't scale up these interventions to create a community unless you're actually setting that as a priority. So that's the first thing. Not that you want to take anything away from the early childhood piece at all, but we also have to not ignore the adolescent time. And then we have to have, at a community level, policies in place that support the kind of interventions that need to happen. So you have to have policies that support health education in the school, so a school district policy, for example. And you have to have policies in the community that can create a safe environment. Policies like bike trails and crosswalks, and so it's sort of again, it's a whole community that is, the school is part of the community, the families are part of the community, so really bringing that all together
is important. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you so much for coming today and for putting on this session. It's very, very important.
Thank you.
Very important to our adolescents and to their futures.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. See you next time for Beyond the Data.
Before I retired from the Air Force, my doctor diagnosed me with hypertension.
Over 1/3 of veterans have high blood pressure, also known as hypertension, making it the most common chronic medical condition among veterans. If your healthcare provider diagnoses you with hypertension, or if a diagnosis of hypertension is uncertain, you may be asked to measure your blood pressure at home. This is called home blood pressure monitoring.
My doctor wanted me to take my blood pressure at home, so the nurse told me to get a tape measure and measure the circumference of my upper arm to make sure that I had a blood pressure cuff that fit, and to sit quietly for 5 minutes before taking my blood pressure, and then to take it twice and record the second one in my book.
Before measuring your blood pressure at home, it's important to select a cuff that is the correct size for you, or you may get a reading that is not accurate. To determine your arm size, use a cloth measuring tape and measure the circumference of your upper arm. Make sure your monitor includes the right size cuff for you. Follow these guidelines to measure your blood pressure correctly at home using an automated blood pressure monitor. 30 minutes before you take your blood pressure, do not smoke, exercise, or consume caffeine. Do use the bathroom if you need to. 5 minutes before you take your blood pressure, sit quietly. Sit with your back supported. Keep your feet flat on the floor and do not cross your legs or ankles. Your arms should be unrestricted by clothing and supported at heart level. Following the instructions for your monitor, put the cuff on by wrapping it around your arm above your elbow. Face the palm of your hand up to relax your muscles. After relaxing for 5 minutes with the blood pressure cuff in place, you are ready to measure your blood pressure. Continue resting your arm on a table or another flat surface at the level of your heart. Do not talk, read, text, or watch television while taking your blood pressure. Follow your doctor's guidance on how often to measure your blood pressure. Following the directions for the monitor you are using, press the button to start the machine. The cuff will inflate and slowly deflate by itself. Each time you measure, take 2 readings, 1 minute apart, and keep a record of the second one. When the monitor has stopped taking your blood pressure, it will display 2 numbers. The top number is the systolic blood pressure, and the bottom number is the diastolic blood pressure. Most blood pressure monitors also measure and display heart rate. Remember, measure your blood pressure twice and record the second one. Write down the date, time, systolic and diastolic measurements, as well as your heart rate if it's displayed on your monitor. Take your written blood pressure log with you to your next doctor's office visit if you have been instructed to do so. Let's review the guidelines for measuring your blood pressure at home. 30 minutes before measuring your blood pressure, do not smoke, do not exercise, do not consume caffeine, but do go to the bathroom if you need to. 5 minutes before measuring your blood pressure, your arm should be unrestricted by clothing. Your arm should be supported at heart level. Put on the blood pressure cuff. Sit with your back supported. Keep your feet flat on the floor. Do not cross your legs or ankles. And sit quietly for 5 minutes. While taking your blood pressure, do not talk, do not text, do not read, and do not watch television. Remember, take 2 readings, 1 minute apart, and keep a record of the second one. After the second measurement, record the date, time, systolic and diastolic measurements, and your heart rate, if it's displayed by your monitor. To learn more about the management of hypertension, visit the U.S. Army Medical Department Office of Quality Management website at the following address. Also visit the VA DoD Clinical Practice Guidelines website at the following address.
What we found is that nearly half of all the overdose deaths related to opioids are due to illicit fentanyl. So these synthetic compounds that come from factories overseas and are sold illegally on the street and poison so many Americans are now responsible for about half of the opioid overdoses in our country. The appeal of fentanyl is really an economic one. It's relatively easy to manufacture, at least in a chemical factory, and it's inexpensive. And really that's what's driving this. We have an inexpensive poison that's a very powerful and potent opioid. So a tiny quantity of this chemical, of this opioid, can be diluted and made to mimic heroin or made to mimic the pills that people are looking for.
CDC's Environmental Public Health Tracking Program brings together environmental and public health information to drive initiatives that improve health, save lives, and enable efficient use of resources. The tracking program's flagship product is the Tracking Network, an information system that provides data and tools to help you make informed decisions about environmental public health issues. The network contains environmental and health data from a variety of national, state, and local sources, including CDC-funded tracking programs in state and local health departments. Select any topic to learn about the types of data, the data sources, and why they matter. Enter a county name or zip code into the Info by Location tool to create environmental health snapshots and graphic displays of the data. Follow the numbered steps in the Data Explorer to create interactive maps, tables, charts, and advanced options. Then hit the Go button to see the results. Use full screen view or click Select Data to compare different data side by side. The map view lets you zoom, drag images, customize backgrounds, and hover over locations to view data. In two-screen view, you have the option to link the map so that whatever you do to one side will happen on the other. Click the settings icon to access many other data viewing options. In chart view, hover over a data point to see geography and data values with several viewing options. Filter and sort data by column in table view, or check out timeline view to see changes in the data over time. Whatever you choose, you'll see your data come to life. Then, share it with a custom link, download it, or export image files. The Tracking Network gives you a variety of tools to help improve health in your community. Get started today at cdc.gov/EPH tracking.
The brain is the command center for the entire body. It makes us who we are. It receives information from our senses and controls our thoughts and movement. To better explore this incredibly complex organ, scientists have divided it into parts and regions. The largest part is the cerebrum, which is divided into two sides called hemispheres, just like the Earth. The outer layer is known as the cortex, which is Latin for bark. Like a tree's bark, the surface is only 1/8 inch thick, but it also contains millions of cells with fibers that send messages to other brain areas. More than 2/3 of the surface of the cortex hides in hundreds of little folds that make the wiggly visible lines on the brain. Animals that are less intelligent have a smoother brain surface. The cortex is divided into 4 regions. The frontal lobe is for personality and emotions, higher thinking skills like problem solving and controlling movement. It continues to develop until you're in your mid-20s. The temporal lobe helps process your hearing and other senses, and helps with language and reading. The parietal lobe is involved with your senses, attention, and language. The occipital lobe helps your eyes see, including recognition of shapes and colors. The thalamus in the center of the brain relays sensory and motor information to the cortex and helps with consciousness, sleep, and alertness. 12 pairs of cranial nerves carry information from your senses to and from the brain and body. Lower in the brain we find the cerebellum, which plays a key role in motor control, coordination, and spatial navigation, so we can find our way out of a maze, for example. Underneath is the brainstem, which connects the brain to the spinal cord, a nerve pathway that runs all the way down your back, sending and receiving information from your senses. The brainstem includes the pons, which helps control our breathing, and the medulla oblongata, which regulates our heart and other body reflexes like vomiting, coughing, sneezing, and swallowing. The limbic system, a region under the cortex, processes our emotions and drives. It contains the brain's reward circuit, which releases the chemical dopamine, making us feel pleasure. The anticipation of pleasure motivates us to repeat important human behaviors like eating, having fun with friends, or falling in love. But it also encourages us to repeat risky behaviors like taking drugs. Drugs signal the brain to release unusually strong amounts of dopamine. This flood of dopamine causes the high that drug users seek and makes it difficult to enjoy more normal, simple pleasures. Repeated activation of this reward pathway can lead to addiction. The limbic system includes the amygdala, which processes emotions, and the hippocampus in the temporal lobe, which is like a memory indexer that sends memories to certain parts of the brain for storage and retrieves them when you need them. The brain controls many actions through rapid nerve impulses, but there are some body functions that the brain modulates over many hours or days by secreting hormones via special glands like the hypothalamus, which wakes you up in the morning and gets the adrenaline flowing, like during a test or athletic event. The pituitary gland, often called the master gland, which helps control growth, body temperature, pregnancy, and childbirth. And the tiny pineal gland, which helps to control sleep and circadian rhythms. These are just a few of the parts and functions of the beautiful, amazing, and complex human brain. It is the center of our world and seat of our intelligence. We must exercise it, protect it, and understand how important it is to every thought and action in our daily lives.